The knock came at 2 in the morning. Not the knock of someone who expected to be let in, 3 small, careful strikes, the kind a person makes when they are not certain they have the right to knock at all and are trying to take up as little of the night as possible. Wyatt Cole had been awake already, the way he was most nights now, sitting in the dark in the chair by the cold fireplace with his hands on his knees and the particular company of a man who had stopped finding sleep reliable. He heard the knock. He sat with it for a moment. Then he rose. He opened the door. She was standing at the edge of the porch light with a baby pressed against her chest and her face turned slightly to the left, the way a person stands when they have something on the right side of their face they are not ready to have seen. She was a full-figured woman, solid despite everything, and she was shaking, not from cold, or not only from cold. The baby was asleep. How the baby was asleep he could not have explained. He looked at her. He stepped back from the door. He said nothing. She came inside. If you have ever needed someone to open a door and ask no questions, subscribe to this channel right now and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story travels tonight, because what happens next in a ranch house outside of Bitterroot Falls, Montana, in the February of 1884, is about to ask 2 broken people whether what is left of them is enough to build something with. Stay with me. Her name was Ruth Hadley, born Ruth Crane, married Ruth Hadley for 4 years and 7 months, which was the full length of time she had spent understanding the difference between what a man was when you were deciding to marry him and what he became when he believed he owned you. She was 28 years old. She had a bruise along her right cheekbone that was 2 days old, and another along her collarbone that was older, and a split at the corner of her lower lip that had opened again on the walk from town because the cold dried everything. She had walked 11 miles. She had walked them in the dark with Clara against her chest and a canvas bag over one shoulder containing what she had been able to take without waking him. 2 dresses, Clara's things, $14 folded into a handkerchief, and a piece of paper she had been keeping under the floorboard beneath the kitchen basin for 6 months, which was the advertisement for the position of housekeeper at the Cole Ranch outside of Bitterroot Falls, cut from the newspaper the previous August, and held onto with the specific intention of a woman who had been making a plan in the only way available to her, which was quietly and without any visible sign of making one. She had known about Wyatt Cole the way everyone in the valley knew about Wyatt Cole, which was to say she knew the shape of the story without most of the details. He had come to the valley 7 years ago from somewhere in Wyoming, no one was certain, and had built the ranch on the Bitterroot Creek land and run it alone ever since. He was not unfriendly, the way some solitary men were unfriendly, with an active hostility toward company. He was simply quiet, transactionally courteous. He came to town when he needed to, and went back when he was done and did not appear to require anything in between. He had not advertised for a housekeeper before August, which meant something had changed, though no one in town seemed to know what. She did not know what had changed. She knew that an advertisement meant a door that might open, and she had needed a door for 6 months, and this was the one she had. The inside of the cabin was warm, he had the stove going, which meant he had been up, and clean in the spare, deliberate way of a man who kept order as a discipline rather than a preference. One large room with the kitchen at one end, and a table, and 2 chairs in the middle, and a fireplace along the far wall with the cold ash of a recent fire in it. A door at the back she took to be the sleeping room, shelves with tins and tools arranged with the precision of someone who knew where everything was and required it to stay there. No decoration. No softness anywhere, except a single folded blanket on the arm of the chair by the fireplace, the kind of object that accumulates in a space without being chosen. He had not lit the lamp. The stove gave enough light to see by, and he seemed to prefer it. She sat down at the table because her legs had decided they were finished. Clara did not wake. Ruth put her hand on the baby's back and kept it there and looked at the man standing at the far end of the kitchen, who was looking at the stove. He was tall and lean, dark-haired, somewhere in his middle 30s. His face in the stove light was angular and still, and held the quality she had heard described as coldness by people who had not looked carefully enough. It was not coldness. She knew what coldness looked like. This was something else, the face of a man who had put everything behind glass, where he could see it but it could not reach him. The difference between cold and behind glass was that behind glass was a choice, and choices could be unmade. He turned from the stove. He set a cup in front of her, coffee, already made, which meant it had been made before she arrived, and he had been sitting here in the dark with it. He sat down across from her. He did not ask what had happened to her face. He did not ask whose baby it was. He did not ask her name, or where she had come from, or how she had found him, or what she needed, or whether she was staying. He put the coffee in front of her, and he sat down, and he looked at the table and said nothing. And she felt something in her chest, release, not collapse, release. The specific physical sensation of a tension that has been held for so long it has become invisible, becoming briefly and painfully visible on its way to letting go. She drank the coffee. After a while, she said, "The advertisement. For the housekeeper position." He looked up. "I'd like to apply," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "The back room is mine," he said. "The loft is yours. There's a pallet up there. I'll get more bedding in the morning." His voice was low and careful, the voice of a man choosing each word with the deliberateness of someone for whom speech had become an effort. "The position is $30 a month. Room and board." "Agreed," she said. He stood up from the table. He went to the chest by the fireplace and took out 2 blankets and carried them to the base of the loft ladder and set them there. And then he went to the back room and closed the door, and Ruth sat at the table in the stove light with Clara asleep against her chest for a long time before she climbed the ladder and lay down and pulled the blankets over them both. Clara slept through the night. Ruth did not. She lay in the dark and listened to the silence of a house that was not her house, and calculated, as she had been calculating for months, what was required and what she had to work with and what the next step was. The next step was mourning. Mourning was enough. She had learned to make mourning enough. She was at the stove before first light. He came out of the back room at 4:30 and found coffee made and salt pork in the pan and cornbread in the skillet and Ruth at the basin washing the cup she had used the night before. And he stood in the doorway for a moment with the particular stillness of a man receiving something he had not arranged for. He sat down. He ate. He did not remark on the food, but he ate all of it, and when he pushed back from the table, his face had something in it that had not been there the night before. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the first faint indication of a direction warmth could come from, the way you see the sky lighten in the east before the sun itself arrives. He left for the range. Ruth fed Clara, settled her on the folded blanket near the stove's warmth, and started on the kitchen. The days assembled themselves into a shape. She learned his hours and preceded them. She learned that he took his coffee without anything in it and his meals without comment, that he preferred the door to the range left open in the mornings for the air and closed in the evenings against the cold, that he moved through the house with the careful economy of a man accustomed to being the only one in it, and was adjusting, without complaint, to the fact of 2 more. She learned that he would sometimes stop in the middle of the kitchen in the late afternoon, not doing anything, simply standing, and that these pauses lasted between 10 and 40 seconds, and were followed by him picking up exactly what he had been doing without any explanation of what had interrupted it. She did not ask. She had learned, in 4 years of a different kind of marriage, to read silences with precision, and she understood the difference between a silence that was dangerous and a silence that was private. His were private. She left them alone. Clara she did not leave alone, because Clara was 8 months old and did not require leaving alone so much as continuous management. Ruth carried her in the mornings during the heavy work and set her on the blanket by the stove when she needed her hands, and Clara regarded the world with the solemn, omnivorous curiosity of an infant who had decided that everything deserved examination, and was working through the list systematically. She was examining Wyatt Cole on the 6th day, when Ruth came in from the root cellar and found him crouched at the edge of the blanket with his forearms on his knees, looking back at her. He had his hat in his hand. Clara had the brim of it in both fists and was testing its structural integrity with the focused energy of someone conducting a stress analysis. He did not look up when Ruth came in. He stayed where he was. Clara pulled the hat toward her face and mouthed the brim and looked at him over it with her large, unguarded eyes. Ruth stood at the doorway and watched and said nothing. After a moment, he reached out one large hand and touched the top of Clara's head, briefly, the lightest possible contact. The touch of a man who is not certain of his welcome and is not taking more than he has been offered. Clara looked at his hand. She grabbed his finger. He went very still. Ruth went to the stove and started the noon meal and did not remark on any of it. It was the 13th day when she found the grave. She had gone to the creek to break the ice on the waterhole, which needed doing every morning in February, and on the way back she took the longer path around the south side of the outbuilding because the direct path had drifted and she had not brought the right boots. The grave was in the open ground south of the outbuilding, marked with a wooden cross that had been made carefully and planted deeply. Someone had put real effort into the cross, had fitted the pieces and sanded them, and burned a name into the transverse beam in letters that were precise and deliberate. The name was Thomas Cole. Below it, 2 dates. The second one was 2 years ago. Beside it, a smaller cross. No name on this one. Only a date, the same date as the second. She stood in the cold for a moment. Then she went back to the house and started the afternoon bread. That evening she asked him nothing. She sat at the table after supper and mended the tear in Clara's gown, and he sat across from her with the piece of harness he was working on, and the fire was good, and Clara was asleep in the loft, and the silence in the room was the kind she had come to recognize as different from all the other silences she had known, not empty, not threatening, not the silence before something happened. The silence of 2 people in a room who had each had something taken from them and were not, for the moment, being asked to explain it. He spoke first. "My brother," he said. He was looking at the harness. He had a ranch in Wyoming, the Powder River country. A pause. 14 seconds. His wife was, the husband before him had done to her what yours has done to you. He said it plainly, looking at the harness. Tom brought her out of it, married her. 3 years, and then a fever took them both in the same week. Her and the child she was carrying. Ruth's needle stopped. "I was there," he said. "I was on the ranch. I was there the whole time she was sick, and I did not." He stopped. He set the harness down. He put his hands flat on the table. "I knew more than the doctor did about the fever. I had seen it before, in Kansas, and I knew what it required, and I did not. I waited too long." He looked at his hands. "I do not know why I waited. I have thought about it every day for 2 years, and I do not know why." The fire shifted in the grate. "I came here after," he said. "I built the crosses. I put them where he would have wanted. He was quiet again. I haven't spoken about it before, to anyone. Ruth looked at him across the table. His face was the way it was when he was not behind the glass, open in the specific, raw way of someone who has taken down a protection and is feeling the full exposure of it and has decided to bear it rather than retreat. You were with them, she said. It wasn't. You were there, she said. At the end, you were there. He looked at her. I know what it is to go through something alone, she said. They didn't. He was very still. You didn't wait too long, she said. You were there. That is not nothing. That is the opposite of nothing. The silence that came after that was the longest she had heard in the house. She counted it, 22 seconds, before he picked up the harness again, and when he did his hands were steadier than they had been. Neither of them said anything more. She went up to the loft. She lay beside Clara in the dark and listened to the wind find the high peaks above the valley, and thought about a woman she had never met who had needed someone to open a door and ask no questions, and the man who had loved her, and the brother who had been there at the end and had been carrying the weight of there for 2 years without setting it down. She understood now why the advertisement had appeared in August. He had been ready to let someone in. He had simply not known until she knocked. Dyer Hadley came on a Tuesday in March. She had known he would come. She had known it with the certainty of a woman who had spent 4 years learning how a particular man thought, and the way Dyer Hadley thought about things he considered his was that they did not leave. She had been gone 5 weeks, which was longer than she had expected to have before he found her, and she had spent some portion of every day since her arrival calculating what she would do when the time came. What she had not calculated was Wyatt. Dyer came in the afternoon when Wyatt was at the tree line, which she suspected was not accidental. Dyer was not a stupid man, only a cruel one, and he would have asked in town and been told the rancher was usually out in the afternoons. He came to the kitchen door and knocked, and Ruth opened it and looked at him and did not step back. He looked older than 5 weeks. Haggard, in the way of a man who had been drinking to manage an emotion he would not name as what it was. He looked at her face. The bruises had faded to yellow and green by now, nearly gone, and his expression did the thing it always did. The quick assessment of damage followed by the specific satisfaction of a man who sees evidence of his own power and finds it reassuring. You're coming home, he said. No. She said. Ruth, I won't. She said. I have a position here. I have a wage. I have a room for Clara and work that is mine, and you're my wife, he said, and stepped forward. And Ruth stepped back once before she stopped herself and stood her ground in her own kitchen doorway, and Dyer reached for her arm the way he had reached for her arm 100 times, with the casual assumption of a man who had never once been stopped. Take your hand off her. The voice came from behind Dyer. Low, flat, carrying the specific quality of a voice that had not been raised and did not need to be. Wyatt was standing at the base of the porch steps. He had come in from the range and had come quietly, or the confrontation at the door had covered the sound of his approach, and he was standing in the thin March sun with his hat pushed back and his eyes on Dyer Hadley, with an attention so complete and so still that it had a quality of its own, the particular attention of a man who has decided something. Dyer turned. He looked at Wyatt. He made the calculation men make when they are deciding whether to press forward or reconsider, the rapid accounting of size and distance, and what the other man's face was telling him. Wyatt's face was telling him to take his hand off her. Dyer took his hand off her. She's my wife, Dyer said. She left without consent. In the territory I know what it is in the territory, Wyatt said. He came up the porch steps and stood beside Ruth. and she felt the solidity of him there without looking, the warmth and the size and the absolute grounded stillness of a man who was not going anywhere. I also know that a wife who leaves has cause, and that cause is visible on her face, and was visible 5 weeks ago when she arrived here in the dark at 2 a.m, having walked 11 miles. He looked at Dyer. She told you no. I'm telling you to leave this property. You have no legal. I have a rifle, Wyatt said, and a record of every mark she carried when she came here, written in a book that is dated and witnessed, and I have a judge in Bitterroot Falls who is a man of sense and does not look favourably on what I would be describing to him. He had not raised his voice once. You will leave this property now and you will not come back, and if you do come back, I will consider it a threat to the people in this house, and I will act accordingly. He paused. I'll say it once more. Leave. The silence that followed lasted 8 seconds. Dyer Hadley left. Ruth stood on the porch and watched him go down the road until he was out of sight, and she stood there after he was gone because she needed a moment in the cold air between what had just happened and whatever came next. She heard Wyatt move to the doorway behind her. She heard Clara's voice from inside, the companionable babble of an infant who has woken from sleep and found herself alone and is making her displeasure known. She turned around. Wyatt was at the door. He was looking at her with the grey, direct eyes that she had learned in 5 weeks did not miss much and did not pretend to miss what they saw. He'll go to a lawyer, she said. Let him, Wyatt said. I meant what I said about the record. He paused, and there's something else I need to say, while I'm saying things. She waited. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of a man who could not find the words. She had learned the difference between those silences by now. This was the silence of a man who had found the words and was making sure he meant them before he used them. I built this place to be alone in it, he said. I came here because I had done something I could not undo, and being around people who did not know that felt dishonest, and being around people who did know it was worse. He looked at the door frame. You came in the dark, and I let you in, and I did not ask questions, because I knew the shape of what I was looking at, and I thought I was doing a practical thing. Giving you shelter. A position. He looked at her. It stopped being practical by about the 4th day. Clara's voice from inside had escalated in urgency and was becoming non-negotiable. There is a great deal more I intend to say, Wyatt said, and I am going to say it. I want you to know I am going to say it. Go get Clara, Ruth said. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but was made of the same material. He went inside. She heard his footsteps on the loft ladder, slow and deliberate, and then Clara's voice changing pitch. The specific shift from complaint to greeting that meant she had been picked up by someone she recognized. And then, quiet. Ruth stood on the porch in the March cold and breathed the air off the mountains and felt the full, strange weight of standing in a place and finding that she was not afraid of what was going to happen next. She had been afraid of what was going to happen next for 4 years. She went inside. He was standing at the foot of the loft ladder with Clara in the crook of his arm, and Clara had her fist in his shirt and was examining the button at his collar with her full professional attention, and he was watching Ruth come through the door with the expression she had first seen on the night she arrived. The one that was not coldness, had never been coldness, was the specific look of a man deciding whether he was allowed to feel what he was feeling and arriving, slowly, at yes. She crossed the kitchen. She stopped in front of him. You were going to say something, she said. I was, he said. Then say it. He looked at her. Clara looked at him. The fire held. Stay, he said, not for the wage, not for the position. He said her name the way he said all things, carefully, like it mattered. Stay, because I have been alone for 2 years telling myself it was what I deserved, and then you knocked on my door in the dark, and in 5 weeks you have made this house into a place I am glad to come back to, and I do not want to stop being glad to come back to it." He paused. "And because I have more to say to you than I have said to anyone in 2 years, and I find I want to say it. If you'll hear it." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. She thought about 11 miles of frozen road and a door she had not been certain would open. She thought about a man who had opened it and stepped back and said nothing, and how that nothing had been the first safe thing she had encountered in longer than she wanted to count. She thought about the crosses south of the outbuilding and the weight a man carried when he believed he had failed someone who needed him, and what it meant that he had told her, and what it meant that she had been able to say something true back to him and have it received. She thought about the record book he had mentioned, dated and witnessed. He had been keeping a record of her. He had been keeping it since she arrived, in case she needed it. "I'll hear it," she said. All of it. They were married in the June of that year, which was the first June Ruth could remember in which nothing was required of her except to be present in the day as it came. Dyer Hadley's solicitor had sent one letter, which Wyatt's own response, together with the record book, which was thorough and specific and dated from the night of her arrival, had answered sufficiently that no second letter followed. What the law allowed in the territory on the matter of a wife who had left an abusive husband and established herself in lawful paid employment was, by the evidence of that particular judge in Bitterroot Falls, more than Dyer Hadley had anticipated. He did not come back to the valley. In the September of that year, Ruth began keeping a record of her own, not weather and yields, though she kept those too, but a different kind of record, in a small book she bought herself from the Bitterroot Falls dry goods store. She wrote in it when something happened that deserved to be written down, which was more often than she would have predicted. She wrote the date Clara stood up on her own for the first time, holding the chair leg, and the expression on Wyatt's face when she did. She wrote the evening he told her the rest of the story about Wyoming, all of it, from the beginning, which took 2 hours and which she listened to without interrupting, and when he finished, she said only that she was glad he had told her and meant it entirely. She wrote the morning she woke before the alarm and lay in the half-dark and understood, with the sudden clarity of a thing that had been true for some time and had only just surfaced, that she was not afraid. She was not afraid. She wrote that down twice, because it deserved saying twice. Clara walked at 11 months and was running at 13, and at 2 years old had her father's grey eyes and her mother's determination, and the combined stubbornness of 2 people who had each survived things they had not been supposed to survive, concentrated into a small person who had been given from birth the particular gift of a house that was safe and 2 people in it who had learned, at some cost, exactly what safety was worth. On a Tuesday in the February of the following year, the first anniversary, as close as they could reckon it, of the knock at 2 a.m, Wyatt came in from the range in the late afternoon and found Ruth at the stove and Clara asleep in the loft and the house warm and the evening meal coming on. And he stood in the doorway for a moment the way he sometimes stood in doorways, taking in the room. Then he said, "I'm glad I opened the door." Ruth did not turn from the stove. "So am I," she said. It was not everything there was to say. But it was true, and they had both learned, at some cost, that true was where you started. The rest could be said in the years that followed, and it was.